she's no beauty queen, but at least all the dirt's off of it. So we're gonna begin on the deck. I'm gonna get that pulled off. We've got some stuff to patch up, and while it's off, I'm also gonna check out the spindle bearings as well as the idler, see if anything needs to be done there. And I do know we definitely need to do something with the anti-scalp wheel on the front, because it's just flopping all over the place. So go ahead and muscle that off. So the more I work on this, the more I realize that there's things I like and there's things I don't like about it. And taking the deck off is definitely one of the things I don't like, because it's all bolted on. You can't just pull a pin and drop it, and it's very heavy. So we got it off though, and we're already starting to see a few issues. So this was held on by wire, but it's pretty well seized to the bolt. This one's not seized, but it doesn't move very freely either. The other big thing I wanted to check was the idlers and the blade bearings. So the idlers are in pretty good shape. The only one that's questionable is this one. You can hear it's starting to make some noise, but it's not too bad yet, so it's got some life left in it still. So the blade bearings, that one sounds a little iffy, but that one is grinding. So that one definitely needs new bearings, and then this one definitely needs new bearings as well, because it's not really making noise, but it gets kind of stiff and stuck at certain points. So this will get all new bearings for the blades, but you see, even after pressure washing, we still got some junk in there, which undoubtedly contributed to the bearing failure. And then of course we have the holes. Luckily they aren't too bad. We just got one here. It seems like this one somehow just got punched in here. I don't think we have too much wear to worry about. And then over here it's worn a bit thin. And then you can see around the deck hanger it's actually starting to crack from the stress because we are missing all the support. It's broken right here. So we'll have to get some new metal welded in there. We'll get some, we'll take apart one of the spindles and see what bearings are in there, and we'll get the bearings on order. So yeah, let's get to it. So since you probably can't get a good idea of how thin this is just by looking at it, here's this should give you an idea, right? Nothing. Yeah. It shouldn't be able to dent that easily. So I'm going to start with the big spot, which is this thin spot. Now, it hasn't broken through yet, but if I leave it alone, it's so thin that it is eventually going to just break through, and then we'll have another hole to fix as well. Plus, there's no way I'm going to be able to weld to the metal right here with it being as thin as it is. It's just going to burn through. So we're going to take this whole piece out all the way across. Luckily, it's not solidly welded. It seems that it was only welded in a few spots. So right along here, we're going to just cut all these welds off, and we should be able to hopefully get that piece out fairly easily. We got all the bad bits out, and we're left with a massive gaping hole. which I know looks a lot worse than it did before, but it's the thing about rust repair. It's going to get worse before it gets better. So all the welding is done, just needs a little bit of cleanup before paint. Now if you'll notice, it says 42 6-speed on this metal, and that's because all the metal I used for this is actually salvaged. It all came from a Craftsman LT1000 frame I had just sitting in my backyard, and it just so happens that the frame material was the same exact thickness as what this deck was originally built with. So I went ahead and used that, saved myself some money and the time and energy of going to buy more metal. So it came out pretty nice, I think. Once it's painted up, it should look factory. Now over here, I did it just a little bit differently. I didn't want to cut a massive chunk out of the whole thing and then weld it all back together. So instead what I did is I used a larger plate, cut out only what I needed to, and then welded it up. So this will be visible when it's all done and painted, but it's not going to be that noticeable, so I'm not too concerned about it. Looking at the underside of the deck now, the welds on this side are not very pretty because I haven't bothered to clean them up at all, and I have no intentions of doing so. The reason why is pretty simple. The bottom of lawnmower decks, especially commercial lawnmower decks, are basically sandblasters when they're running, the only difference being that it's grass and dirt instead of sand. So even if I cleaned up all these welds, made them look all pretty, and painted everything, after the mower ran for a while, it would all just be blasted smooth anyway. So there's no sense in really putting effort into that. So this is the side, the corner where I replaced the large piece where it had been worn thin. I also had to do some repairs to the baffles. This area was worn thin and there was a chunk missing, so that got a whole new piece. The corners both had holes from being worn thin, so we did some patches there. Added some weld to the seam to give it some strength because it was starting to separate. And then this is the other patch that I was talking about earlier. You'll notice the area that's welded the square on this side is much smaller than the actual patch itself. I decided that, as I mentioned, I didn't want to cut a massive chunk out of this, and I figured that it would be better to just go ahead and patch it. So the patch covers this entire area and it's welded on both sides. It's also tied in to the deck hanger, so this will spread the load out over a large surface area, so it'll be nice and strong. And then of course this baffle had a giant tear in it and it was ultra thin, so I just cut that all out and put in a whole new piece of metal. But yeah, that about does it for the welding. So what's next for this deck? It's going to get some new bearings, a few small bits and pieces need to be fixed, then paint, and it'll be ready to go back on the mower. The tires are flat again. What a surprise. Well, it's finally time to address the part about this mower that's been annoying me since I got it, and that's the tires. So these tires are worn out, they're dry rotted, and they hold out air for maybe 2 hours before going low, if you're lucky. So you got a brand new set of tires for it. These are actually exactly the same as the ones that came off of it. These are Lightfoot, which I have honestly never heard of. I thought they were just some cheap no-name tire, but apparently that's what came on the mower originally. I wanted to get maybe a name brand like Carlisle because that's what I usually go with, but these are 22 by 950 by 10, which is kind of an oddball size, and they didn't have the tire tread that I wanted in that size. So this was my best option, and I didn't really have the option of going to a different size tire because that would have required a different size rim. I wasn't about to buy different size rims. So normally I do this with tire irons, but since these have a hole in the middle, we're going to try it on the manual tire changer. That should be a little bit easier. So the deck is reinstalling the mower. I did replace the spindle bearings, but that will be in a separate video, which I will link down below for anyone who's interested. I had considered painting the entire deck, but I opted not to do that simply because I didn't feel it was worth the time and energy to do so. So this is just Rust-Oleum Sunrise Red gloss paint. This is from a rattle can, nothing special. You can get it from just about anywhere. Obviously it's not a perfect match with the factory paint. I didn't really expect it to be a perfect match, but my experience with this kind of paint on lawnmower decks is that for a while it'll stand out a bit, but once it's had time to be exposed to the elements and bake out in the sun for a while, that gloss will fade away and it'll blend in much better with the factory paint. So this is the side that had the most work, and this is where I cut out that big section of metal and welded a whole new piece in, and I'm extremely happy with the way it turned out. It looks factory, so I couldn't really ask for it to come out better than that. And then over here, this is the side with the visible patch, and you can see, obviously you can tell that something was done there, but it's very nice and clean, so you know, doesn't look like it was all hacked together. So I'm very happy with the way that came out as well. So what's next for this mower? Well, it's actually going to go out and it's actually going to do some real work now. Instead of just mowing my yard, I'm going to use it to mow a whole bunch of yards, do some real commercial work. We'll find out if there's anything else that needs to be tended to other than the few things that I already know about, and then after that, all that's left is all the little nitty-gritty stuff that needs to be sorted out. Alright, so I've been running this mower for a while now. When I got it, it had 624 hours. As of right now, it has 654 hours. So I've put almost exactly 30 hours on it in that time. Now, it's been pretty good, but it has had a few issues. Some of them minor, some of them not so minor. So the first issues I had were all fuel related. Now, the very first time I went to mow with this, I got through about 2 yards, and then it acted like it was starving for fuel. It would only run with the choke on, and then eventually it wouldn't even run like that. So I tried everything I could to get it running out in the field, and it just wasn't happening. It wasn't working. So I brought it back, and what I found was that the carburetor had somehow managed to clog up. I still don't know where it clogged up or how, since it was so clean and brand new when I took it apart the first time, but it did. So I went ahead and I thoroughly cleaned everything out, and that solved it for a while. But eventually it started acting like it was starving for fuel again. But this time it wasn't the carburetor. Now, I started looking around whenever it would start to die, and what I found was that I wasn't getting fuel going from the fuel pump to the carburetor, and I thought it might be the fuel pump, so I tried a different fuel pump, and it was the same result: no fuel going to the carburetor anytime it was starting to die. And what I found was that if I blew backwards through the fuel line, I could feel that there was a restriction somewhere in it, and then eventually that restriction would let go and the fuel would be able to flow again. So I just kept the tank topped up, and I kept doing that every time it died, and that got me through for a little while. Now, when I had first taken the fuel pickup out to change that grommet, I noticed that it had a little bit of a kink in it, and at the time I wasn't too concerned about it because it was still plenty of space for the fuel to flow. But I figured that what was happening was something in the fuel tank was getting stuck in the fuel pickup periodically, which would cause it to starve the engine of fuel, and then when I blew through it backwards it would clear and it would be fine for a while until it eventually found its way back in again. So I went ahead and I fixed the kink, just heated up the fuel pickup, stuck a screwdriver in there and got the kink out just to be sure. And then I also went ahead and replaced this fuel line, which runs from the fuel pickup into the fuel filter, just to make sure that wasn't potentially collapsing, because all this fuel line going all the way up to the fuel pump is under suction rather than pressure, so it's possible for the inner layer of line to delaminate and then clog up. I have seen stuff like that happen before, so I replaced that, and I haven't had any more problems with it since then. So everything was good for a while, and then a while back I had an issue with the Pto Clutch, and basically it was fine all day, and then at one point I shut it off, went to engage it again, and it simply would not engage. And I have a video about exactly what happened, which we will cut to now. So this is the Pto Clutch that failed today. As you can see, we're actually missing the rubber shield, and there's a number of balls missing from the upper bearing. So what's happened, if you look here, you see this little shiny spot right here? Well, it turns out that the key for the hydro drive pulley was just a bit too long, so when I tightened it down, it was actually pushing this bearing right up against the end of that key. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a crack in the inner race from being clamped up against that key. Now, of course, with a cracked inner race, the bearing isn't going to last very long, so it did hold on there for a while, but eventually the balls wore out. You can see it got excessively hot, just way overheated, and it's ejected some of the balls and started creating a bunch of debris, and then today it just quit engaging altogether. So obviously we have mechanical failure, but I'll show you why it stopped engaging electrically. If I can get this open with one hand. Okay, so this is one part of the clutch. Now you can see we do have some wear on here, but it looks fairly normal, nothing too big, nothing out of the ordinary. But if we pull this off, you see we got all that debris in here, and then you can see that our inner shield, or what's left of it, is just completely destroyed as well. So what happened is when this bearing failed, it started dumping debris into this area, and this is the coil, and somewhere along the lines the debris somehow managed to damage the coil. And yeah, you can see it's just been rubbing on everything, and this coil is no longer functioning. So it looks like this PTO clutch is completely toast, which really sucks. Means I'm out like 120 bucks. I'm gonna have to buy a whole new one, so I don't think I'm going to be able to repair this coil. So here on the mower, you can see here is the hydro drive pulley, and then this is the key that we're talking about. You can see the end of the key has actually been flattened from where it's been clamped up against the bearing race. So I'm going to have to get a whole new clutch, and we have to take this key out and cut it a bit shorter so that that doesn't happen in the future. And then I will also make sure that nothing on this pulley is going to be touching any part of the clutch other than the inner bearing race. Now, originally I was going to get the same clutch I had before, but unfortunately right after I bought that clutch, the price shot up from about 120 bucks to more like 160, 170 bucks. And there were simply better options at that price range. So I ended up going with one of these extreme mower clutches. The pulley is billet steel. It has more protection for the wiring, and the coil is supposed to run cooler and help it last longer. Overall, it's just a much better unit, and it only cost me a little bit more than what the same clutch I had before was going to cost, so I just went ahead and got it. I also shortened up the key, so it won't be having any more issues with that. It's been on there for a few weeks now. It hasn't had any problems. Now, I have done some other things as well that I haven't shown on video. I changed the fluid and filters in the hydros. They now have synthetic motor oil. It recommends motor oil, but I go ahead and put synthetic in hydros every single time because the synthetic just holds up better and will help them last longer. The engine is also running synthetic motor oil now. I just put the cheap stuff in when I first started it because it needed to break in, but now it's running synthetic motor oil. You'll notice that part of the rollover bar is missing. I actually took that off. The rollover bar was nice insurance, but I found that if it was up, it was just hitting things constantly, and if it was down, the trailer tailgate wouldn't go up all the way, and ultimately it just ended up causing a lot of problems. So I took it off, and it's been a lot more convenient. I got the side panel put back on. I was waiting until I got the wiring sorted out to do that. The previous owners had actually hooked the starter solenoid and the afterfire solenoid straight to the ignition switch and bypassed pretty much everything on the electrical system of this mower. So I did sort that out. What it was is it actually wasn't the safety switches that were causing the problems. The problem was the connections to the safety switches. One of the wires had actually broken, and then the rest were intermittent, so I just replaced all the connectors on the safety switches, and that sorted out all the problems. So I got that all sorted out, put the trim panel back on. Now you probably have noticed the chute block, and yes, that is a wood chute block. It's kind of janky, not really proud of it, but I needed something quick and easy that I could throw together to block that chute off, and that's what I came up with. I intend to build a metal chute block for this just as soon as I get the chance, and I do want to make a video about that. Now you can see how it's holding up. Unfortunately, it's very dirty. The grass has been very wet lately, and it's gotten rained on a number of times, which is making dirt and grass stick to it very badly. But overall, I'm happy with how it's holding up. Now you can see here the difference between the stock paint and the section that I painted. It shows up more on this camera than it does in real life, but you can see, like I said, the gloss has been knocked down significantly and it blends in much better. It's not perfect. You can see it's hit a few things here and there, which is to be expected, but this rubber bumper has actually done a very good job of protecting it and keeping it from getting too beat up. So I'm not concerned about those scrapes and scratches. I knew those were going to happen. I can just easily touch those up later whenever I get around to it. I do want to go ahead and touch up that deck at some point, just because I don't like the way it looks right now. That tire has a slow leak. I believe there might be just a little pinhole in it, so I'll take care of that. Other than that, that's about it. It's been very good so far. Not really having many issues other than the ones I described before. So that's going to pretty much do it for this video. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below.